Hi there, me again. What we're going to have a look at today is recording a very simple macro in Excel. And the reason we're going to do this is we're going to start off looking at VBA for Excel. This is going to be a series of stuff. If you have any specific questions on VBA, do ask me, and that will prompt me to make a video on the subject. So don't be afraid to ask. Just send me a message or put a comment on any of the videos and ask me if you've got a specific thing you want me to cover on VBA. This is aimed to take people who've never touched VBA before up to whatever level you want to get up to. So to start with, we're going to do recording a simple macro. Now, the way that we can record a macro, two different ways. Down here, we can click on that button. If you don't have that button visible, if you right click on the status bar, make sure this macro recording has a tick next to it. That won't start you recording, but it will make the button visible so you can then click on the button to start recording. Now the other way is from the developer ribbon here. Now if you don't have the developer tab showing, just right click anywhere, customize the ribbon, and over here what you want to do is make sure that little box there with developer has a tick in the checkbox. You'll then be able to go to the developer ribbon and start recording your macro. Now before I do that, we've got to think about where we want to save this macro, and the key is what we want to use it for in the future. Now if I want to create a macro that will run on any workbook that I have open, I actually don't want to save it on this workbook, because if I've got this workbook closed down, this one called Simple Macro, if that's actually closed, I haven't got the macro to run. But I do always have another hidden workbook running in the background called Personal. Now don't go ahead and unhide that, but just be aware that it's there, because when we go to record a macro, we have a couple of options for where we can store the macro. One is in this workbook, so if I want to send the macro to somebody else so that they can use it, I would use this workbook option. Or the other option that I'm going to use would be Personal Macro Workbook, which would be in my personal, that hidden one that we just looked at, which is always running in the background. Now you'll see there's a third option for New Workbook, but honestly I've never actually used that one. I would always either use Personal or this workbook, depending on where I want to run the macro from. For this example, we're going to use this workbook, and we'll call it FirstMacro. And down here in the description, I recommend you put your name and the date, just so that you at least know that you wrote this macro, and when you come back in 6 months' time to look at your fantastic code that you've actually written. So click OK, and we're now recording a macro. The way we know is up here it doesn't say record, it now says stop recording, and down here we have a different icon, and that tells you a macro is currently recording. Click to stop recording. Okay, what we're going to do with this particular macro is, the first thing, we're going to select a cell. We're now going to make some changes to that cell. So I'm going to go back to the Home tab, make it a little bit bigger. So I've changed the size to 16. In fact, I'll change it to 18. I'm now going to resize the column width. I'll take it out to, there we go, let's take it out to 18 wide. I'm going to change the fill color and the text color. And now what I'm going to do is click in that cell and just type my name in and press enter. Now I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, and we're going to have a look at the code that was recorded. Now there's two different places that we can go to, or two different ways that we can find how to edit the code. One is Developer and Visual Basic. Now you'll notice when I hover over that button, it doesn't actually tell me anything in brackets as a keyboard shortcut, but there is a keyboard shortcut, and it's Alt F11. Now, if you just have a look at the screen that's popped up, you'll see here that I have two workbooks open. One is that personal one, that's the hidden one, and the other one is this one here called Simple Macros, which is this one here, the Excel one that I've saved the file in. Now, because I've saved the file in there, you'll see that there is a module. Now, within Excel, code is stored within modules, and if I want to see module 1, there is my first macro. So all I did was double click on there just to make this visible. There's the name of the macro, there's what I typed in as a description, and here is the code itself that was executed. Now, some of this we don't actually need. Now, VBA is what's called an object-oriented language, and what that means is that you talk about the object and then about what you want to do with it, rather than like we do as humans. If I wanted to say select cell C1, that's how I'd say it. I wouldn't say cell C1 select. That is how we have to do it when we're talking about the code. So we need to talk about the object first of all, which is the range C1 or cell C1, and then what we want to do with it, select it. And then carrying on from there, we talk about the selection, which is now the object, so the thing that you have selected. What do we want to do? Well, we want to change some of the properties, and we want to change the font property size to 12. But you'll notice that actually several of those lines of code, because I was clicking on the a bit bigger text button, they're unnecessary. So I can delete those lines of code and simply jump straight forward to, with my selection, which we know is cell C1, change the properties of the font, the size to 18. So we'll jump there in one go rather than doing those multiple steps. Now, honestly, it's irrelevant. You don't have to do that if you're just doing one or two things. But when you're running a huge, long looping code, you will need to do that. It will change how long it takes to execute code. And it's really good practice to clean up your code. Okay, next thing we're going to do, columns C to C. In other words, the whole of column C, change the column width to 18. And next, with the selection, which is cell C1, that's still our selection, and the interior, in other words, how it's displayed, the formatting, in other words. What do we want to do? Well, we want to fill it with a pattern, a solid pattern, and that solid pattern color is 65535, which is the yellow. Tint and shade, nothing, pattern, tint and shade, end with. And then with the selection font, in other words, the text again. So rather than the interior, which is how it's filled in, we're now going to do it with the text, color, and there's the color, which is red. What we're now going to do is go back into cell C1 select, because we're not doing stuff to the cell itself. Now we're doing something into the cell. We're going to put some data into it. So the data goes in as a formula, and it's just that text that we're typing in. That last line of code is simply me pressing enter, which selected the cell underneath. So again, we don't need that line of code. Okay, these ones here with zeros, they're actually unnecessary as well. All they do is, had it had some other settings on it, it will reset them to 0. So had there already been formatting applied to that cell, if there'd been a tint and shade of some sort, that will now reset that to 0, whereas had I not had that line, it would leave it as it is. Okay, let's run this code, but first of all, let's clean everything off. The way I do that is I say clear all, and I'm going to resize that down. Now, a couple of different ways that you can run the code, and the best way is from the debug menu here, and step into. Now you'll notice you can press F8 to step into, and you can keep just pressing F8 and it will go down line by line. Now, I can't actually do that because I'm running a recording program which uses F8 as the pause button. So that wouldn't be good at all. So all I'm going to do is keep clicking down here. Now the line that's highlighted in yellow is the next line that it's going to execute. So the very next line, the next time I do that debug step into, it's going to select cell C1. So you should have a look over here. You should notice it doing that selection. Debug, step into, yep, and you'll notice it's done that. Next line, selection font size 18. So if you have a look up here, that should jump immediately to 18. Not like it did before. Beforehand, what it did was it stepped 12, 14, 16, 18. Now we're going to change the column width. Now it's going to change the interior. Okay, and now it's going to change the font color. Now it's difficult to see that because we haven't actually typed anything in yet. Now what we're going to do is select the whole of that cell again, and then we're going to type into the active cell Oaks. Now actually that's the end of the routine there. Now that selection there, that line, we don't actually need to do that because we've got that there and it is still our selection. But you'll notice what the code has done as we run it. Now remember that I said the code will run on whatever your active sheet is. Now we ran it on this sheet. If I make a new sheet and now go back into the code and run the code, and a simple way of running it is to click on there and it will run the whole lot. It's now done all of those commands on this sheet rather than the first one. If I wanted to do it on a specific sheet, then in my code, when I say that range that I need to select, I also need to specify which worksheet or even which workbook, if I've got multiple workbooks open, I want to do that. Okay, that's a really brief intro into recording a macro, how it does the code and where it stores the code. Now another useful thing that a lot of people don't realize is that these modules, as they are, they're quite confusing, just being module 1, module 2, module 3. You can actually rename them if you have this properties window showing down there. That is the property of the thing that you have selected. So if I select a sheet, there's all the sheet properties, and if I go into here and where it says name, not name in brackets but just name, if I change that to data, you'll notice that's a way of renaming the sheet. Yeah. So the name becomes data or whatever it is you want it to be. In the module we only have one option, but that's also to rename. It's a good idea if you do rename your macros, just simply so that you can then at a later date go back and have a look, especially if you are saving them into personal, because your personal ExcelVBA will have a lot of macros in it after a very short period of time, and it's really difficult to find out which macro is which if they're all just stored in modules. Remember that a module can store more than one subroutine, so if I recorded another one immediately now, it would also go into that first macro. It would just have a horizontal line under there and the next subroutine name. Yeah. So what I tend to do is split them out and save each one in its own module. Okay, if I now save this, and if I just go to, I'll do F12, which is a save as, you'll notice that down here, the save as type, I've saved it as an Excel macro enabled workbook. If I just say save it as an Excel workbook called Simple Macro, when I say save, it tells me it cannot save the code in a macro-free workbook. So if I continue saving as macro-free, it will simply delete that macro that I've just recorded. So what we do need to do is we do need to save it in one of these file types that does support Excel macro enabled workbook. So that will support the code. So I'm going to call it Simple Macro, click Save. It's going to say, yes, you do already have one, so I'll replace it. Okay. I hope that's been useful. I am going to carry on this series and look at a whole bunch of other VBA, just getting more and more complicated. As I said at the beginning, if you do have anything specific with VBA that you want me to do a video on, just pop me a message and I'll be happy to oblige. Okay, thank you for listening.